Welcome back. You are listening to Lurie Daniel Favors, and I'm here at the Black Men Matter Father's Day Town Hall Special with some amazing guests, and you guys have really helped to sort of push the conversation forward. And one of the things that we picked up on in the previous segment was this reality that you all, everything that you said, whether your father was in your life, whether they were not in your life, each of you spoke to the importance of your village and having a community of men who were able to pour into you. But you also spoke about your experiences in ways that really defy a lot of the stereotypes that we tend to hear and think about when it comes to Black men. And I just want to read some statistics for you all because it's important that we're aware about what the world is saying about the brothers in our community, because the world got a lot of things to say. The world got a lot of things to say. So when we look at some of the statistics, we're seeing that generally they still skew towards the negative, but there has been some improvement around the margins. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, in a report released by the National Fatherhood Initiative, the rate of fathers being absent from the home is at the lowest point that it has been in 30 years. Now, that's nationwide, so we have more fathers who are in the home, but that's also true for Black families as well. The proportion and number of children growing up without a resident dad are the lowest since 1989. A primary reason for this great news is the dramatic drop in Black children growing up without a resident dad. In 2023, 47.5% of Black children lived without a resident father. This is the low, although that number is high, that is the lowest proportion since 1973. And the lowest number since 1984. And yet we still have a reality where far too many of our children are living in households where only one parent is able to be present. And regardless of which parent that is, we know that that is a stress and a strain. Ask any of us who have lived in a house with a second parent and then that parent goes away on a trip. We know real important how significant it is for multiple adults to be in a household, regardless of what their particular formulation is. Contrary to popular belief, we now are in a moment where 42% of Black children are living with two resident parents in the household. Whether they're married or not is not the question. The question is, are there two parents in the household? Census Bureau also found that by 2021, about 52% of Black men, compared to 61% of all men who were 25 and older, had been to college. This was a 50% increase over 2018. Now, the percentage of Black men with a bachelor's degree or higher, still low at 22%, but that is an increase from where it was at 19% just a few years ago. And yet, according to the Sentencing Project, despite some long-term declines in youth incarceration, Black youth, and Jordan, this is getting to one of the comments you made, Black youth remain vastly more likely to be incarcerated than their white peers. And we see similar trends in education and in a variety of other fields, including health as well. So the trends are incrementally moving in the right direction. And yet, we all got brothers and friends and homies and corner boys and examples of brothers who, for whatever reason, have run into obstacles that they are not yet able to overcome. What are we to make of some of the slight improvements that we're seeing in the ways that Black men are meeting these obstacles, and yet grapple with the realities that we as a village still have a hell of a lot more to do to make sure that there aren't gaping holes for more men in our communities to fall through? Jordan, I'm going to come to you first for that, because as somebody who's very close to the population of people that are often caught up in these statistics, I'm curious as to what you have to say about this.
Yeah, and I was
if you could speak directly into the mic.
Yeah, I was putting some thoughts together because I try to always keep it in the lens of media when it comes to even when we think about college and the perception of college. And a lot of times we have to think about like podcasts, we have to think about social media and its impact on our perception of reality. Right. A prime example is like when you look at podcasts or like a mainstream narrative of college, for the most part, it's making it seem as if you don't need to go to college in order to obtain wealth. So my generation has come to prioritize the pursuit of economics over education. But and I think there's a lot of things getting caught up in the conversation, the dialogue. When we say like schools have not effectively taught our young Black men or our Black children their history, it's not saying that we have a war against education. Right, that's two different things by saying we need to amend the system and the institution than saying you shouldn't seek to be educated. Right, that's two different things, but it's getting caught up in the conversation of you don't need to pursue college to make money, but you do need education to maintain it. Right, so when I think of things like that, when it comes to this percentage, even though it increased from the 19 to 21 as you stating, is we have to understand we have to combat a narrative. Right, we see like a thing like Streaming University. That's something that Castaneda did. I'm not too sure if y'all familiar with streamers. He did a Streaming University. Was that the best depiction of college? No, not for those that went to college. Then I learned about a different world. I'm like, oh, that's probably a better perception of what a collegiate experience is, right? So when I'm thinking of media, many of y'all had various references growing up, like the Bill Cosby show. And then we read about it, says the correlation between that show and those that enroll into HBCUs, right? So now we're saying, are we getting the same variety of depiction of our experiences, right? So I think of that. Then I'm thinking of the incarceration system. Yeah, it's nothing to be glorified about this system, but we do understand that we live in a country that economically benefits off our exploitation and that's going in certain routes. Whether that's the school to prison pipeline, whether that's music, the music industry and its correlation to our actions and our behavior, which leads us to going to prison. There is systems developed to maintain a certain cycle of our young black men going within this system. Right. In order to combat it, I do believe that there takes a building of another village that counter these narratives. In the music industry, I watched like the BET Awards. In my mind, I sat there, I'm like, there's no way no one finds a problem with the way in which we portray ourselves through films or through our music. And no one's saying like, why are black women starting to portray themselves in a certain manner, right? It's certain things that we once found to be demeaning that we now see of honor. Right. So in my context, I'm always thinking about how films have played a role in not only how other people have perceived us, but how we have come to perceive ourselves.
I think he's so right in terms of media. Yeah, I think so many times we're able, once we see what it could look like, I think we've seen way more images of couples, particularly black couples, co-parenting and not fighting, right? And co-parenting and figuring out, or co-parenting and getting over the hurdles. We've seen more images of that. I can think about, the show that Will Smith produced with Dwayne Martin, and I remember watching that and it's like, oh, they're really doing this co-parenting thing. And I know so many people who referenced that show and talking about when we was in our divorce, we were like, yo, this is how we gonna do it, and I think it goes back to even when I spend a lot of time doing some stuff with our folks who are fair chance companies that will hire people who have been formerly incarcerated. And what we've been talking about is like, how do we get a storytelling series of the stories of people who actually have done it, and so that we can show what it looks like to be on the other side of it, so that people can say, oh, I know what it looked like for me to go back and just roll the dice again with what got me in jail. Let me see what it actually looks like. And there's a vision of it that's positive, right? Of somebody who's like, okay, I went to this company, I did this, I went through this program, or I found a job like this, I used this technology to do it. I think we've got to supplement our kids, particularly our young black men's education, in a way that I feel like communities in certain pockets of the country that have a lot of resources do it, or like how we did it in the country in Mississippi with clubs and sports and all those types of things. But if we've got a system right now where the United States government spent eight times more money per capita on seniors than they did on kids in the last 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
8 times.
Wow.
That's who votes. At 8 times more.
Right.
So I think about how do we supplement how we talk to our kids about education and getting money, because there's a whole group of people out there who are dead set on telling young black folks that they don't need to go to college. Right. But they don't tell them what their options are and what that looks like, what that path looks like without it.
It's important that we think about that. And Ryan, I'm going to come now to you, because education, that's one of your key areas. And when we're thinking about what we are how we are teaching young people, and this actually goes back to something you and Jordan kicked us off with, which was that idea, like, I don't have to search for the gangs are coming for me. When it comes to how we are the village, I'm not talking about how the school system prepares black boys. When I think about how the village prepares black boys, because these systems are going to exist and do what they do, and they're going to perpetuate what they perpetuate, because that's how they roll. But when it comes to our obligation as the village, how should we be showing up to shape those educational experiences? Because if we leave it to the systems you were just referencing, Drew, we're going to continue to get more of what we've already got. And I don't think any of us are satisfied with that.
Right. I'm going to steal your proverb. We both say it. So there's an African proverb that says, a child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. A child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And that's what we see. I mean, if we talk to our peers, how many black men have went through a rites of passage? And a rites of passage is an experience to give you a context, to prepare you to be the best version of yourself in the context of society. Now, we as African people traditionally watch Roots again. Now that we're older, right? A lot of people, especially if you watch Roots with this lens, Kunta Kinte is 15 years old, going through his rites of passage with a whole has a whole village of black men. Now, mind you, this is his society where they have wealth. They are self-determining people, and he still has a network of men who are preparing him to be a productive man for his village. As a matter of fact, in traditional African society, you can't even have a wife. You can't even transition into adulthood until you go through this. And this is when we were in our natural state.
Yeah.
Right. So today, when we talk about what do we have to create? We have to create villages. I think what Jordan said was real. We saw this in Bed-Stuy. There are more black men my age, right, who when my students were having issues, right, and needed some money, right, there were more black men who are OGs, gang affiliated, who are a resource to them. You give you an ounce, get you a 2-piece. Then there are black men who are professionals, and we live in Bed-Stuy where you see both.
Yeah.
But a lot of the black professionals are walking right by the stoop, not even speaking to the kids. So, like we said before, they're going to take it where they can get it.
Right.
And as a community, we have to create villages. Kunta Kinte learns at 15 that no material object is more valuable than a man's life. He learns that when you get in war with your enemy, leave your enemy an escape route so they can get. He learns all of these lifelong lessons, but the whole thing was intent about teaching him his purpose. And if we create villages that tap into our kids' purpose, it might not be college.
Yeah.
It might be college, but it don't even matter because education is a part of your journey. And your purpose is going to manifest if you go that route or you go this route. So we have to, we've given our kids to systems that benefit from our destruction. And we talking a lot about sports, how it changed my life, right? But a lot of black men are tied up into sports and are cultivated in sports because we're making money for white folks.
Ooh.
Right? So they'll have you doing call and response and 10 hours of meetings a week and 20 hours of working out and it's great. But when are we going to be able to do that for our own community? And a lot of the work that we do, people say, man, you got a lot of passion. You crazy. They used to call me the crazy dread because I be in class sweating. I said, but if I was your basketball coach or your football coach, it would be normal.
Yeah.
I've seen coaches pray. I've seen coaches shake kids up, right? And what I'm talking about, this conversation is way more important than any football game. So we've got to create village. We got to know who we are, who we were before 1619, and we have to create cultural mechanisms that are distinctly designed to meet our needs. This brother right here is the product not only of parents that poured into him, in a community that I know some of the elders in this community that poured into him. He went to a school that was created with his needs in mind, the Eagle Academy, that was designed specifically for black boys to prepare them and put them in the rites of passage so that they would be prepared to sit here and be a representative for our people. And we have to create those cultural mechanisms, and we have to remember no one is coming to save us. If we don't do it, it is not going to get done. No one's coming to save us.
And it has to happen outside of those mechanisms too. Like we have to practice. You and I talked about thick community in terms of like I learned more Black history in church than I learned in the school, right? I learned more about who my elected officials were in community organizations and learned more about government and civics from community organizations that my parents were affiliated with that were getting people out to vote. Right. And so that's what I mean when I say supplement our kids' education, is that if you are a Black man in your community and there's not a young Black man or a young Black girl who knows that you personally are rooting for them to win, you are failing.
Wow.
You are failing your community. If they don't know that, if there's not somebody in your community who does not know that you personally are rooting for them to win. And that's a litmus test, I think, that we have to apply to our lives as it relates to that thick community, because it's going to happen outside of our doorstep. Like, we got it, to your point, we got to go to them.
That's right.
It's funny that you mentioned that phrase, Brian, because I asked Mayor Brandon Scott that I literally
Which
posed
one?
the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down. Amina, let's pull that clip. I want us to hear from Brandon Scott, Mayor Brandon Scott, as he responds to that question. And then Dr. Damas, I want to pull you into this space because you are someone who has done the work of building institution. And that is a missing component, I think, of the conversation. Because yes, we, the village, are going to show up. Yes, we have to supplement education, but we also have to have an economic approach and capacity to be able to build pipelines to hire these young boys into. Let's hear from Mayor Brandon Scott, and then Dr. Damas, I want to turn to you, and then we're going to pull some of these amazing questions and comments in from the chat as well. Amina, let's hear from Mayor Brandon Scott.
There is this phrase that was popularized by the film Black Panther, and it is a phrase that basically says the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Right. And right now, you mentioned one of your uncles who has done a lot of hiring with regards to social programs and folks who would have, some difficulties in their life, who would then get access to another opportunity, another chance. And a lot of those programs right now are under threat. We're seeing everything from the budget cuts of the federal government to substantive programming that was specifically designed with the needs of our community folks in mind, now being considered in ways illegal or unlawful because it invokes the recognition of DEI. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute because you really took that term and ran with it. But as members of the village who have the privilege in this moment to be able to have this conversation, coupled with what I feel is an obligation, an opportunity, but yes, an obligation to help Black boys to thrive. What is our village's responsibility in this moment? Like, how can community members work with local government, with the federal, state government, to the extent that that's possible, to ensure that not only are our boys not falling through the cracks, but they are actually lifted and elevated in ways that will put them on a path similar to what your family was able to organically do for you?
Yeah, I think that the tougher part of my job is when we lose some of our young Black boys and girls, because I feel like we have come a long way, but we still have some things that we have to address. And in this moment, it's more important. I say this to people all the time, especially Black men. All the stupid, petty things we got with each other, we got to set that to the side because we are under attack again. A deeper attack, because we have to understand, I have to remind people all the time, is that Black people have been under attack by these people since they discovered us in Africa. So let's be reminded, and they're trying to erase our history and our existence, and we have to remind them that they can't erase our history because they are our history. Everybody comes from Africa, whether they want to realize it or not. But that aside, we have to come together to focus on these things, especially at the local level, right? Community and the local level, local government, and state level, depending on where you are, because the federal government, obviously, we can see what's happening there. We have to fill the gaps, and that means we have to have our local leaders, wherever. My brother and sister mayors around the country are doing great things in our community. But a lot of that we were doing with the support of the previous presidential administration, who invested directly into cities, not giving it to states to pass it down, directly into cities and community in ways that we've never seen, right? For example, here in Baltimore, you talked about our historic reductions in violence. $50 million of ARPA was used to build up our community violence intervention work in Baltimore City, right? That's historic. But now that we see these cuts and these changes, we have to come together to fill the gaps, but also take that work further. And that's going to require, at the community level, especially places that have Black businesses, business owners, people that can help fund these things. This is now not the time for it to be like my program, my program, my program. But the ones that have been proven to work, that have the relationships, we have to build those now and really wrap our hands around our young people.